Hello, I'm Dr. John Biggott. I'm a politics tutor and I have been posed a question by a student which I'm going to answer in a few minutes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, have a look at my Patreon page and see if you want to subscribe for more videos of this type and more, hopefully to help you get great grades in your A-level government and politics. And of course, I'm available for tuition as well. So spread the word on that front, or just get in touch and ask for a lesson. Right, let's take a look at what this question is. So this is, are Reform UK on course to win the next general election? This is something that has been doing the rounds for a while now. I've seen this question being posed by the media. I've seen polls looking into it. It's a tricky one. It isn't really our job as politics interested people to speculate, although it can be fun to speculate. It isn't our job. It certainly isn't your job as politics students to predict the future. But I can understand why these sorts of questions get asked. We are living in some very unusual times with a party like Reform ahead of what we normally call the main parties. So we've got an unusual situation, and it is a suitable question to delve into. We could also rephrase it slightly and ask whether Nigel Farage, their leader, is on course to be the next Prime Minister, because of course we could find that the next general election produces a hung parliament. In other words, Reform don't win the general election, but could still end up with the keys to number 10 Downing Street. So there are so many different scenarios available here, and we are still nearly potentially 4 years away from a general election. So an awful lot can happen between now and then. But let's take a look at some of the background as to why this question is even being posed. And then I'll have a stab at trying to answer it. I'll look at both sides of the argument and come down with my own verdict. We can see that that light blue line of Reform since the general election, this is the average polling numbers for each party since the general election in July 2024. And as things currently stand, Reform is rising and rising and rising. There will come to a point where it can't go any higher. But the key point at the moment is it's rising because Labour and the Conservatives are falling. So you've got multiple moving parts here and multiple things going on within those moving parts. I'll give you an example. Kemi Badenoch, as leader of the Conservative Party, is yet to have been in that post for a full year. There's been lots of speculation about whether she can carry on leading the Conservatives into the next election. It is at the year point of her period in office that people can start to challenge her for the leadership of the Conservative Party. That, I think, will be November the 5th. People can start sending, if you know your Conservative Party rulebook, you will know that Conservative MPs can start sending letters to the chair of the 1922 committee asking for a vote of no confidence in her. Just imagine if that happened. That changes everything. That changes everything. It might lead to the Conservatives plummeting further, or it could lead to them getting a leader that revives their fortunes. The Labour Party is an astonishing government at this stage in the fact that they plummeted so quickly. They enjoyed no honeymoon, and it's almost like they attempted not to have one by doing a series of very odd things with some very strange messaging. I'm thinking of things like the winter fuel allowance. I'm thinking about their welfare reforms and the announcement shortly after winning that election that you know, the Conservatives have destroyed the economy and there's a £20 billion black hole or whatever. I think people were hoping for something a bit more joyous after that election, and that has not been the case, and it's been reflected in the polls. It is very rare for a party to do well after their honeymoon period has ended. You get a short burst of success, and then it tends to be downhill from there on in, even if it's downhill in a slow way. Obviously, you can win more than one election, and I wouldn't say that Labour can't win the next election. Just imagine the budget coming up. Just imagine if that goes well for them. They get popular, maybe economic growth picks up even more than people are predicting. Maybe their fortunes change, and that could change the way that this graph is shaping out. And also, you look at Reform and you have to wonder what changes they're going through. They're a growing party. Parties that are growing can be difficult to manage if you don't have an infrastructure. The Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Lib Dems, they've got branches up and down the country which have got histories to them and are embedded in their communities. And that is not the case for Reform. Doesn't mean they can't succeed. It doesn't mean that they can't win the next election. But will they be as popular in 3.5 years' time? We don't know yet. We don't know yet. So let's take a look at the options here. Let's start. Oh, actually, before we do that, before we take a look at the options, let's take a look at some polling from YouGov. And that previous graph was basically an amalgamation of the polls, which is available on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not always a wise place to look for things, but that chart is okay. We don't know whether the polls are accurate even, but YouGov did an interesting poll recently. They did an MRP poll, which is a way of trying to predict every single constituency. This previous poll is just the I can't get back to it now. Anyway, the previous poll was an amalgamation of the averages across the country for the share of the vote. This is much more detailed. Those previous polls normally only ask around about, well, between 1,000 and 2,000 people normally. This is a YouGov poll that got responses from 13,000 voters and tries to predict what would happen if there was an election at the time of the poll for every single constituency. And what you can see here on the left-hand side is the share of the vote. Reform at 27, Labour at 21, the Conservatives in third on 17%, the Lib Dems on 15 and Greens on 11. But the way that they think that would work out in terms of seats gives Reform 311 seats. And you need 326 for a majority, so they are just short of a majority. Would that give Nigel Farage the keys to number 10? Possibly. They've got options here. They could try to do a deal with the Conservatives, and who knows, this sort of polling might encourage them to do a deal with the Conservatives, or it might not have any impact whatsoever. Nigel Farage has said he wants to destroy the Conservative Party. So not a majority in Parliament. That doesn't mean that they couldn't go it alone. They will have policies at the next election which the Conservatives can get behind and might not oppose. So they can try to govern as a minority. That would be an option to them. Much easier to govern with a majority, of course, but that would require a coalition. And the Conservatives seem the most likely to do a coalition. But there we go. I mean, it would require the other parties. The other parties would find it difficult to do a coalition. So it puts Reform in the driving seat. It puts Nigel Farage in the driving seat. And so, on this basis, you could say, yeah, they're on course. They're on course. And in fact, there are other projections out there, more crude projections, that give them an overall majority, ranging from, up to 100-seat majority and 36 I've seen as a potential, all sorts of different variables. It's because it's so difficult to predict the level of support. And of course, we've got so many seats where Reform have never won before. It's very difficult to model the impact of this share of the vote, I think. YouGov's pretty good at doing it, though. Let's assume they're right and that they are on course as things stand. But we haven't got an election coming anytime soon. So let's take a look at it. Let's say, yes, Reform will form the next government of the UK. They're well ahead in the polls. The two-party system is difficult to break into, but that current level of support, if it goes right on the day for them, could mean that they're able to win in multiple areas of the country. Although what we normally say about the two-party system and first past the post is it favours parties with a geographical heartland. Labour's in the north and in towns and cities, the Conservatives in the south and in rural areas. The polling as it stands currently kind of negates all of that, because the Conservatives and Labour are so far behind Reform that they literally could win anywhere if things go well on the day for them. It would depend on who's turning out and who's turning out in the most numbers. Is it our Reform supporters really that big in number, and will they all turn out on the day? Will people come out of the woodwork and suddenly think, no, well, I'm just going to support the norm, as it were? It would be difficult to predict, but that is what we're saying, that they are going to do that. They can break through that two-party system with the current levels that they are polling. We can also say that Farage is their greatest strength in terms of communication. He is very good at getting attention, and he's very good at keeping it. He is able to explain things in a succinct way that appeals to large numbers of people. Incidentally, not just people from the right, but also traditional Labour voters who might have been considered left-wing previously are now kind of heading towards it. Maybe we're talking about Brexit supporting Labour voters. It's always difficult to generalise with a great deal of accuracy, but older Brexit supporting previous Labour voters seem part of the coalition of voters he's trying to appeal to, and he's very good at appealing to them, and of course people on the right. There's lots of news reports focusing on the death of the Conservative Party, and if the Conservative Party falls to the kind of levels that are being suggested, and they might end up with less than 50 seats. Who knows what pressure that is going to put the Conservative Party under in the next few months and years as we get closer to such an event. The Conservative Party is going through a period where it really needs to work out what it's for. And just like the Labour Party is trying to mimic Reform in some ways, so is the Conservative Party, perhaps in more detailed ways, and that poses problems. You could argue that the Conservatives are doing the right thing because Reform is so popular. That's where their voters are heading to, so they need to be more like Reform. You could also argue that they lost most of their seats to Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and actually there is space for the Conservative parties to go in a slightly leftwards direction. The problem they have with that is Boris Johnson purged the Conservative Party of its more one nation style candidates at the 2019 election. And so he fundamentally changed the Conservative Party ideologically at that point to becoming a much more Brexit focused party. As a result of that, it's hard to think who would be a one nation leader of the Conservative Party. It's difficult. I'm not sure there is one. Labour are facing turmoil at every turn, and you have to assume it's going to continue. We can't assume that they're suddenly going to get better at doing things, better at communicating, better decision making. They've even had, considering the massive majority that they've got, they've even had trouble getting through manifesto commitments. I'm thinking of the welfare bill. The amount of people having to resign from the cabinet has been quite interesting for such a young government. It's almost like they're really not ready yet for government, which is odd when you've been out of government for 14 years. You'd think you were going to hit the road running. And very different in that respect from the New Labour years, where they had really done their homework and were ready for government. There's going to be some upcoming issues as well, which are going to likely help reform further. We've got the budget coming up, which potentially won't go well for Labour. I think there's going to be tax rises, and even if those tax rises are just for the richest, it won't be presented like that by the newspapers. It will just scream tax rises. Whether that can be offset by investing in things that make people feel richer, because we can talk about the economy either working or not working in terms of things like economic growth and in terms of things like inflation and so on, their measurements. But really what we're talking about when it comes to an election is how people feel. Do people feel richer? Do people feel better off? And how does that affect the way they want to vote? That is a more difficult thing. People are also warning of another international financial crash on the way. Obviously, again, we don't know if that's going to happen. If it does, I'm going to say it kind of helps reform. I mentioned a possible leadership challenge to Kemi Badenoch. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's possible. And then there's elections in May 2026. So by the end of this school year, there's going to be elections for the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Parliament. If reform do well in those, we're getting closer to reform forming the next government. So that's kind of the sorts of things I think are important in arguing that reform will win the next election. Let's look at some of the alternatives. So first of all, I'm going to argue that their support is flimsy. I think it is based mainly on discontent, which is coming out mainly about immigration, actually, also a little bit about net zero as a concept. But it is not based primarily on the idea that Reform is a brilliant party. It is based, I think, and you can argue against me if you like, put it in the comments, on discontent. And I'm also going to argue that although he's a great communicator, Farage is actually their greatest liability. He really isn't very good under pressure. If you watch detailed debates that he's in and interviews with the press, he hasn't actually got the answers. His policies are not fully worked out or even complementary to one another. There's an incoherency with Reform's policy that shows that they're obviously trying to get votes from the left and the right, and ultimately that doesn't really work. It is difficult to imagine what they would actually do in power, and indeed when they're questioned about their policies, they kind of say things like, well, those were vague ideas that we put down for the election. We knew we weren't going to win, so we're not going to have to do them. Right, okay, well, how do we judge you then? It gets a bit difficult. So they're not very good at that sort of thing. And Farage himself has a habit of leading parties that soon disappear or lack relevance pretty quickly. He gives the impression that although he's very ambitious, he also gives the impression that he doesn't actually want the responsibility of doing things, the hard work of government. He won effectively. He won the Brexit referendum, and then kind of just disbanded or left UKIP, and then he got fed up with the Brexit that was being developed, so he started the Brexit Party, and then it morphed into Reform UK. It's all a little bit ad hoc and odd, and so he's strange. Also, as this party grows, it's going to become unwieldy. We have a party-based system, not a presidential system, and he is the Reform Party. So what happens when people disagree with him? Well, we've seen it already. We've seen people disagree with him and not come out of it too well. And so I've got a feeling all of this will implode at some point. People will start to see through this, and people will start to realize that these policies don't stack up. Although people might not. People don't necessarily spend a lot of time getting stuck into watching the news and reading detailed stuff like A-level politics students should be doing. But under scrutiny, I think this party has a lot of problems. And particularly as it gets bigger, it is going to have to listen to multiple voices from within its own ranks. The two-party system is hard to break through. And I know I said earlier that they're polling at such a level that that shouldn't really matter, but it still remains that it's hard to break through. If you look at 1983, the 1983 election is perhaps the one to look to here, and you look at the SDP Liberal Alliance. Well, the SDP didn't really break through. They caused Labour an awful lot of trouble because they took votes away from Labour, but it didn't result in them becoming an electoral force. And we could look at the 2024 election in a similar way in times to come. All of this could come crashing down. It's incredibly fragile because it's based on discontent. If the government suddenly if people feel better about the economy soon, feel as though they're richer, that discontent disappears, and then potentially reform support goes. Where do those people go to? I think most of them actually go back to the Conservative Party. So in some ways, the Conservatives, sounds really weird to say, but I'm going to say it, the Conservatives' best hope is perhaps the government doing well, the Labour government doing well. Also, we know that Reform UK candidates at local and national level have been prone to scandals. There's been quite a few already. There's lots of examples out there for you to go and find out about. I'm not going to list them, but there's been quite a few people at a local level, particularly since they did so well in the local elections, that have since resigned, or it's found out that they perhaps shouldn't have been a candidate in the first place. So here's my verdict. What's yours? What's yours? My verdict is Reform won't form the next government. I don't think Farage has got what it takes to be Prime Minister in any case, but that doesn't mean that people will notice that before the election. He's not from one of the great offices of state. He's never been leader of the opposition, and every Prime Minister that we've had tends to either be in a great office of state beforehand or leader of the opposition. Like I say, economic growth could change everything. And I think in our two-party system, the Tories are actually much more likely to bounce back. But there's reasons we analyse the past rather than predict the future. Predictions are often wrong, and mine might well be wrong too. Let me know what your verdict is. What do you think? Are they on track? Are they not? We will find out as time goes by. But yeah, it's a bit of fun to predict, but I'm going to say reform will not win the next general election whenever it comes along. Okay, thank you very much for listening and watching, and happy studying. Goodbye.